So the last talk, not only of the afternoon, but of the entire French-Brazilian seminar, will be by Maria Elice, and still about teleology and purpose, ideas about purposes in Darwin's works, and today, legitimate or illegitimate, permitted or needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here until 5 o'clock, almost. And thank you, João, for organizing this. These small meetings are always wonderful because we stay together all the time and we can talk with people. So, yeah, thank you. Well, cadê aquele... aqui. Yeah? Okay, so I'm going to talk about teleology, that title that was there, and I will try to go to these 4 items. Why talk about teleology, and a kind of introduction. You forget that we had these 2 presentations before, so I was just trying to contextualize what a kind of subject is this one in the Institute of Bioscience, teleology. Then I will go to this kind of provocation that is characterizing what can be seen as teleophobia and teleophilia. And then I will bring to you a typology of different kinds of teleology as a way of solve or give us perspectives on how to deal with this. And then I will put my final conclusions. I will read part of it in my text, and then I will move to the quotations that I brought in the slides. So, discussing the idea of purpose, that is teleology, in Darwin's thought, requires a preamble in an auditorium such as this one at the Institute of Bioscience. And I think the first, I have to begin with the role of teleological ideas as they appear in the philosophy of biology today, in the 21st century. In other words, I talk about teleology. Then, since the attribution of function and purpose to living systems is an ancient practice, and given the perspective of the historian of biologists, that I am, I will show how 2 traditions of thought described for more than a century as teleophobic and more recently as teleophilic have come down to us. The goal of this dichotomy is not to declare winner or losers or not to advocate for one side or over the other, but rather to bring to light the tension that in fact runs through the entire history of studying living beings. As a methodological approach, I will use typological tools currently employed in science education, particularly in the teaching of evolution, to contrast what can be considered legitimate and illegitimate teleological explanations from the standpoint of contemporary science. To illustrate the semantic breadth of teleology, I will draw on quotations from notable authors throughout history, with particular attention to Darwin. I was not so on this for this presentation, but Darwin will be there anyway. At that point, I opened the discussion on how far teleology is permissible or even necessary in biology and in teaching of biology today. In other words, why teleology now? So, in my conclusions. So, why talk about teleology? it is important to begin by briefly noting the current prevalence of discussions about the purpose of living organisms. This is evident in the opening sentence of the entry Teleological Notions of Biology in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, where Colin Allen and Jacob Neal state, although the attribution of function and purpose to living system is an ancient practice, teleological notions are largely considered ineliminable from modern biological science, such as evolutionary biology, genetics, medicine, ethology, and psychiatry, because they play an important explanatory role. So this is what some of the philosophers of biology are saying. Several authors emphasize that explanations attributing structure, function, and adaptation to organisms and their parts for the purpose of, in order to, or for the sake of, are not merely a figure of speech, although such explanations have been and likely still are heavily criticized in biology. Their persistent use is due to the very manifestation of function and purpose in living systems, signify that the effect in question is a goal. So just as descriptions in the mechanical mode identify causes as producing their effects, descriptions in the teleological mode identify means as conducing to their ends, as Dennis Walsh wrote in his book of 2015. Another example of this position from farther back in time, from 1981, is the provocative idea of teleology in action, illustrated by the philosopher of biology Michael Ruse. Before the publication of Species, Ruse argues, most people considered the organic world to have been miraculously created by God. After its publication, everybody knows here, most people considered the organic world to have been... acho que pulei uma frase. The most, yes, after the publication, I will use the Darwin's one words, that is, in the end of the origin of species, species have been and are being evolved, so not created by God. And this was from common ancestry, and according to a simple principle, a natural cause, namely natural selection, acting on randomly arising variations. This was, without doubt, a major revolution in thought. Yet, as Ruse continues, before the publication of Origin, it was said that eyes exist for seeing. After the book's publication, and to this day, it is said that eyes exist for seeing. In other words, from the point of view of teleology, on the origin of species made no difference whatsoever. The causes changed, but teleology did not. Of course, I know this interpretation was not universally accepted, either in Darwin's time or in the 20th century or even now. Some argued that Darwin definitively eliminated teleology from biology. And we heard some examples here today. Others that he merely naturalized or redefined it. And still others that a new term like teleonomy, for instance, was needed for teleological explanations in evolution. So we can discuss this at the end. We can return to this. Just a parenthesis here regarding the terms. We need to remember that this word, this very word, teleology, is quite a new word in the history of natural history, because it's a word from the end of the 18th century, not end, the beginning of the 18th century. It was created by Christian Wolff in his work of Philosophia Rationalis Ideologica. And teleology was defined as the part of natural philosophy that explains the ends of things. Of course, before that, we have the notion of telos, but this was made with the term final cause, that by itself is a term that is dated on time. I mean, it was created and became standard with the Latin scholastics, especially Alberto Magnus and Thomas Aquinas. And before that, we had the very notion of Aristotle that never used neither final cause, neither teleology, but that for the sake of which, or similar words to express this meaning. Well, moving forward, now I'm going to show this tension teleophobus and teleophilis as adjective and not substantive. In Darwin's view, two categories of purpose or teleology can be identified in organisms. On the one hand, organic structures are constituted and articulated so as to integrate an organized being, an internal intraorganic teleology. On the other, they simultaneously adapt to their surroundings or conditions of life, a term Darwin used to designate concrete environmental circumstances. It's an ecological notion. That is, the contingencies of the struggle for survival, as Gustavo Capone put it. So he made this analysis of the teleology of Darwin. I'm borrowing this from him. Thus, the theory of natural selection, by accounting for the adaptations manifested in the organic world, understood scientifically as adaptations, removes the need to invoke any supreme artificer, such as that implied in the constitutive teleology of William Paley's argument for natural theology. The genealogy of this internal teleology traces back to what Kant alluded to in the third critique, where an organized being is not a mere machine, and now I'm quoting Kant, is not a mere machine, but a being in which everything is at the same time an end, reciprocally a means. So, rejecting mechanism as an explanation for the regularities of organismal development, and instead incorporating the idea of organism as self-organizing entities, Kant highlighted the distinctive property of living beings, their immanent purposiveness. We can discuss later also this immanent here. Taken as natural purposes, however, organisms were thereby placed beyond the reach of the methods of modern science. That means Newtonian mechanism, which Kant otherwise endorsed. Consequently, the purposiveness of organisms, what we have called internal teleology, functioned for Kant as a purely heuristic principle. Yet this principle also deepened the divide between the living and the non-living worlds and reinforced what Dennis Walsh has called the exceptionalism of biology. Kant's prohibition on appealing to physical laws and forces to explain the complex, apparently intentional activities and adaptations of organisms became one of the central obstacles to the acceptance of Darwin's theory, especially among German thinkers. And for this, I took a quotation from Sander Gleboff, that studied the reception of Darwinism in Germany. And so Sander this, the authors of the time, when the German translation of The Origin was published in just a year after the publication in London, the authors of the time had good reasons to be evasive on these points about teleology, for they would not have wanted to contradict the high authority of Kant, but by being either too teleological or not teleological enough. The Germans' naturalist respect for Kant's maxim of an epistemic rather than ontological internal teleology served as a way to retain this category of teleology in biology. Even so, some were openly opposed. It was in this context that the term teleophobia emerged. It was in 1866, attributed to Carl Ernst von Baer, that you should know, people that knows history of biology. And he did so in an article published in the Bulletin of the Imperial Academy of Science of St. Petersburg. I'm not going to read all this quotation that is long, it's just for contextualize, but I go directly to the middle of this, to the end of the second part, where is written to express the conviction that this fear of purposes, or rather of ends, or rather we can add goals, this teleophobia, as one might call it, seems to me to arise just as much from a confusion of concepts as the view of that schoolmaster who recognized God's wisdom in having always directed the great rivers to where the great cities lie. The term appears again now as an objective in von Bayer's advice to his anti-teleological critics numa obra, in a work on the dispute over Darwinism. And here he wrote, I therefore urge to teleophobes, that is, the naturalists averse or opposed to purpose, to substitute the word Alemão, I'm not going to read, but can be translated as end-oriented, with goal-oriented, or if they prefer, in accordance with a goal, in appropriate contexts. Although those naturalists who use end-oriented already understand in the sense of goal-oriented. So he's being satirical, just proposing that the words that cause that teleophobia, so change the words. 3 years later, the expression had already circulated among German scholars, reappearing now substantiated and alongside other, less burlesque expressions in a book by Rudolf Schmidt, a theologian of the Evangelical Church of Württemberg. And this quote is also funny to read, so I brought to you. In order to be fair in our judgment, we must let the representatives of this view speak for themselves. The proponents of this teleology, as the exceedingly productive Haeckel calls it in the coinage of new terms, the aposcopiology, as Ebrard correcting linguistically corrective and somewhat pedantically names it in his apologetics, and teleophobia as it is playfully referred to by von Baer. So, by invoking the nicknames, the nickname teleophobic, coined after the publication of Origin, we set aside the long and well-known tradition of aversion to teleology, typically traced back to Democritus' mechanism and carried forward by the key actors in the origin of modern science: Copernicus, Bacon, Galileo, Descartes, Gassendi, Boyle, Newton, and etc. With the Cartesian analogy of the animal machine, a radical unificationism emerged in biology, reconciling living and non-living beings while rejecting the exceptionalism of ancient and medieval views of the uniqueness of organisms, their forms, natures, and purposes, an archaic model to be overcome for these actors from the scientific revolution, the so-called scientific revolution. This is also the categories that Dennis Walsh used in his book to characterize the poles of the tension I'm bringing for you here. The century-old term teleophobia, far from rare in post-Darwinian biology, arose precisely as a reaction to the mechanistic and unificationist vision. From its first appearance to the present, the call for a semantic extension of the term teleology persists. So we can read in a very recent chapter in a book authored by Fabregas Tejeda and Jan Bedke. We concur with Haig, that is the author of the chapter they were discussing there. So we concur with Haig's project to dismount teleophobia in the life science, provided scholars offer detailed and careful treatments on what it is meant by teleology and in which context it is warranted to bring in this explanatory mode. So this is another authors, philosophers of biology, proposing that yes, we have to dismount teleophobia, but for doing this, we need to know what we mean by teleology. Joining the effort to combat teleophobia in biology, particularly when it is grounded in prejudice rather than careful historical and philosophical understanding of teleology, it is time to dialectically turn to its counterpart, teleophilia. This term, recently used in biosemiotics by Eric Schultze and Jörg Handling, was defined as the tendency to attribute goal-directedness to agentic systems, such as organisms and groups of organisms. Assuming dialectics between the two notions, our intention parallels that of Walsh when he argued that one event can have both a mechanistic and a teleological explanation. because while one explains how it happened, the other explains why it happened. And in following the why question, we explain the occurrence of the event as an effective means for realizing the goal. So, in science education, the validity of a teleological explanation depends on whether it corresponds to underlying causal structures. When the cited causes fail to bring about the phenomena of interest according to the current understanding of evolutionary theory, the explanation is identified as illegitimate teleology in contrast to legitimate forms that constitute proper objects of scientific investigation. Building on previous categorizations of different types of teleology, such as in an article from Brock, Tsourakis, and Kampourakis, and from Susan Hanisch, both quite recent articles, we broaden the scope here by incorporating additional cases drawn from historical accounts as follows. So, what teleology or a typology? Finally, I will get to this point for you. Não sei qual botão. Well, I will try to bring examples of this. The intention is to draw a line and to understand that we can use teleology or other word or whatsoever, but the telos is present in science and it can be used in science and it's recognized in systems, biological systems, only in biologicals, in living beings. This perspective treat it as completely legitimate. And of course, in doing so, we are not approximating ourselves from the illegitimate uses of teleology, and here is a kind of anachronic judgment of the past, because I'm going to call illegitimate all the historical conceptions that teleology already have, and that can be separated in these different types. So I'm not going to read all of this because I'm going to show the examples, okay? So, in contrast to the preceding atomist view, Democritus, Epicurus, in the Timaeus, Plato describes how the universe was formed by an ordering intelligence, the demiurgo, literally a public craftsman. Unlike the Homerical gods or blind natural forces, the demiurge is wholly good and therefore feels no envy. The absence of envy implies that he desires everything to reflect the order, goodness, and rationality of his own nature. So this is just to show that in Plato we find this kind of, and our category, our typology here, we'll name external teleology, that is the kind ethical and cosmical. It's cosmical without doubt, but it's also ethical because Plato is associating the good, the jealousy, and so his phrase is, he was good, and in the good no jealousy ever arises about anything. And being free from jealousy, he desired that all things should come as near as possible to being like himself. Então, the particle 2 is the indication of the teleological reasoning, and of course he is talking about his demiurgo. This passage is considered the core of Platonic teleology. The intrinsic goodness of the demiurge is the final reason why the cosmos exists in order and beauty. Platonic teleology resonates in Christian theology. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, where the benevolent creator brings the world into being with order and purpose. So this is this cosmical, ethical, and of course external to the beings teleology. We put in that block of as illegitimate teleology from the perspective of our present science. The other example, another category, is the external, but Christian divine teleology. And then we have, for instance, Augustine, claro, but he himself who gave being, gave also form and order in number, weight, and measure. Or, like Aquinas said, some intelligent being exists by whom all natural things are directed to their end, and this being we call God. So this is the standard formal teleology inside the Christian deity. We can give thousands of examples, of course. I will bring just for the context of Darwinian, pre- and post-Darwinian biology, William Paley, that wrote, every indication of contrivance exists in the works of nature. Or like John Ray, the natural historian of 17th century England, the part that made this teleology applied to living beings and describing the relationship between the structures and functions of organs and biological systems using external purposive explanations. So John Ray said, the parts of animals are so framed for use that they plainly evidence a design. So it is with John Ray in the context of the natural theology in England that this idea of design or getting in the history of the notion. Well, that is well known, but if we, as Victor mentioned, it was not only Marx, not only Darwin that weren't consistent in their words. Here I bring a quotation from Newton, the one that, of course, with his mechanism view, banished teleology, and we can find in Newton many passages where he profess external Christian deity, or what we are calling here illegitimate teleology. Newton wrote, God in the beginning formed matter in solid, massy, hard, impenetrable, movable particles, and all things have been placed by his providence. So even someone that is using a mechanism approach and is banishing teleology from its science, he could not banish himself from the theological teleology. So this is the point that I like to stress. Another possibilities. We know that vitalism is a kind of umbrella term that can be understood, that was understood very differently from different authors, but can be understood in its simplest form as a metaphysical thesis asserting the existence of non-material forces that cause organisms to be functionally integrated and exquisitely organized as they are. Such views were advanced by scholars of embryonic development in the 18th and late 19th centuries, and they persisted into the early 20th century. So some examples here from Bishar. As I'm late, I have a few minutes. I'm not going to read all of this, but just to know that that I am considering, I'm taking these different vitalistic views as an external one, and I am not sure if these visions were cosmical. So this is because they are not these examples I didn't put in this together with Plato as a cosmical teleology. I am calling it by its own name, vitalistic. Of course, it's a work for the philosophers to tell if they are of the same category or not, and thus, and this should be done using the concrete examples of the different kinds of vitalisms we had in history. So for our proposals, I'm just using the label, and then I can pass to the internal, another illegitimate teleology that is internal, anthropomorphical, when an analogy of human intentionality is made to non-humans. And this we can find, of course, the critic of this was made by Hume, David Hume, that said the analogy from human artifacts to the universe is weak. We have no experience of word making and therefore cannot conclude any intelligent design. So he made it clear that we can't do this this movement from the human to non-human entities. And of course, we know, everybody that knows, that read Origin of Species, knows that Darwin makes lots of anthropomorphical statements because he used this analogy and he had to defend himself from the critics of his time that he was using this anthropomorphism as a metaphor, and he did it along the book. If we want to view this from the perspective of what is legitimate or not, we should say that Darwin here was doing something that he could not have done or should not have done. We have to discuss too also. Another kind of illegitimate teleology that is in turn, by necessity, inconscient of the organism. And this is linked to the acquisition of heritable characters. Of course, this we will find in Lamarck and also in Darwin, when they use all the inheritance of acquired characters. This is the kind of teleology they were doing, and that our perspective said that is illegitimate because he's attributing the cause of this necessity of well, here is a place, a point that I will leave this in suspension to analyze better later. Anyway, and this the last category of illegitimate teleology would be this internal, but by conscious desire of the organism. And then, because this change can be passed to future generations. Where we find this kind of teleology? Well, people use it to say that was in Lamarck. but we know that is improperly attributed to Lamarck, because for him the changes were not from the desire of the organisms, but from this necessity. Sorry, you know. Well, I will finish quickly because yeah. So I would show the affirmative teleology that we can accept today. So there is one that is human intention for human action. It's okay. So when we think about the human situation. Another teleology that is legitimate is that of the function, and we find this also in Darwin, but since Aristotle it was there. It's the kind of teleology that links structure and function. This is something that we can study scientifically. It's not, it doesn't have anything transcendental or metaphysical. We can study it in the living beings. Molecular function that we find in the textbooks, of course not in Darwin, but in textbooks of molecular biology. The adaptation, the natural selection, and here is the point, that can be understood as a teleology process if we stay in the first moment, or the local, as you said. I think here is the point where the local can be applied. Of course, when it's applicable also to developmental teleology and animal behavior. Everybody knows the example of Nico Tinberg. So animal behavior here, I quoted Aristotle, it was there, but we know that in ethology, like Nico Tinbergen expressed in 1963, on names of methods and methods of ethology, when you ask the question, I'm sorry, there is in Portuguese, why birds sing in the spring? Well, Nico Tinbergen said you can have 4 different kinds of answers, and if you look for these answers, I think they are correlated to the kind of typology I'm using here. So, and another one that I leave for the audience to help to decide or to analyze is another immanent metaphysical teleology that may be the one in Leibniz that I understood as an ontological teleology, or that one of Kant that is an epistemic teleology only, it's not ontological, and I'm putting this in this new category and not as the cosmical of Plato. So with this, I just I'm bringing to you the problem, and we need to move forward to solve all the questions, and mainly to respond this question: legitimate or not, permitted or needed. Thank you. Sorry for the time.
Thank you. Maybe we can start with the question that you wanted to ask before and that you refrained to do.
Yeah.
This is unusual, but...
Yeah, it's just that using this typologies, we already talked a little in the coffee break. So I think what I would ask is if this kind of typology, we can move away from the metaphysical or theological notions of teleology and approximate to the structure, function, and physiological and even natural history teleology. So it would be a question for him just because he was so afraid of being close to, I provoked him, so he is more teleophobic, I am more teleophilic, and where do we can stand for a proposal for moving forward?
I think that certainly clears the table, right? Organize things. Because when we talk about teleology, it seems that we are talking about a lot of different things.
Sure.
Right?
That's the point.
Because I wouldn't have any problem with functional talk. I think that's okay. It's indispensable in biology. I don't see any reason to get rid of functionality, right? But I was very against a notion. But I think that's why it's important, and I just touch it very rapidly during my talk. I think we are hardwired to find ends and purpose in our experience, and we over-project it, right? So that's why we need to be cautious, to treat it with some kind of maybe I'm generalizing or over-projecting something in nature that's not already there. I was talking about Dennett, and I think Dennett helps us when he talks about a design stance and an intentional stance, and when it's legitimate or not to use that, when I should treat something like it is designed. And I think it's okay to treat something that was constructed by natural selection as design. I have no problem with that. And then we have intentional stance.
Yeah.
When we should ascribe rationality, or intentions and
even for
purposeful behavior to something, right? And I think it's okay to do that to living things, but maybe we should just do that to cognitive things, but they are the same things, or they are degrees of cognitions, and that's. But there is this fragility in human cognition that we need to stay cautious, because we tend to see conspiracy theories and something like that, right? We see intentionality when there is none, and we see purpose when there is none. So be cautious with that.
I would make a second point, not only for him but for you. These people are that is working with this typology to bring it to science education, to clear. So the problem is in saying that teleology is not good, that is an old-fashioned way to look for nature. We don't discuss its presence in the talk of every biologist or every teacher of biology that says that eyes are made for looking, and so you don't discuss this. We just say no, this is not important, or teachers are only using metaphors, as Darwin tried to respond for his critics. But the problem is there, so we need to face it. This is the first point. The second point is another thing that they use as a support for these initiatives comes from the research on psychology that are showing that young children mainly understand better when things are explained to them teleologically. So this is what you said, a kind of we are hardwired for this. Well, psychology is showing that we are hardwired for this, because if you try to explain to children what is a table, it's not sufficient to say that a table is an object made of wood. You have to say a table is an object where you can put your elbow. What is it made for? Made for its function. And so we go back to Aristotle's notion of what defines the thing is its function. If you don't say this function, this final, this telos, you don't have the whole comprehension. This was in Aristotle, and I think this is the thing that psychologists are trying to say. Of course, I can argue against it. I myself can argue, saying that I know that these psychological empirical studies are being made by people that are thinking about this, so we have to take care also to see how much bias are in this research. But even so, if it's okay, it's a strong case also that teleology is there. And if we don't treat whatever the way we find to treat it, we just leave that it is subjeticiamente entering in our science classes, our history classes, and everything. So it is a kind of urgency for teaching about science, talk about science.
But the point of teleophobic would be that's precisely why we need to harness our little teleological minds. So they don't run away like crazy, right?
Yeah, but
We need to constrain it, discipline our minds, because they are spontaneously teleological, seeing ends and purpose where they're aiming.
well, but if our minds are like that, it means our minds are nature. And if it is in our minds, so it is ontological. How can I not accept this as an ontological thing about nature?
I think they are ontological, natural purpose, but they are very specific. And to be sure, we're not talking about the system.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we have time for one last very short question.
I have a very short question.
Oh.
Maybe someone else didn't answer.
I have questions, but I have the opportunity to
We can talk, yeah.
I wanted to put some wood in the fire, as we say here in Brazil.
Okay.
I'm using your terminology to his question.
Uh-huh.
So here, the thing about his talk was like, is the development of science somehow teleological? And I wanted to ask, on your view of external teleology, couldn't there be an external teleology to the advance of science because of the structure of the universe? The structure of the universe, whatever you're trying to discover, constrains somehow and guides somehow the path, right? Or not? That's the wood in the fire I wanted to ask you. I wanted to see you guys fighting about that. Sit back and...
Okay. Thank you for the short question.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think treating internal, you said this is something I did. It's not there, João. I am trying to change the slide. When I put all the legitimate one as internal, is because, well, this is my bias. I am trying to treat it as, yes, thank you. As, sorry, plan. As ontological. And this is for living beings. And so what this table shows is that anything that comes from our thoughts cannot be here because we can't treat it as scientific object of investigation. So in some sense, I think I'm, at this point, I'm really flattening teleology, because even when you put the question of the conscious and the human conscience and cognitive development, I wouldn't say anything about that because I think it's much more complicated. So I prefer to stay in the as Dennis Walsh made in his book, at least in the first and second part, he was opposing non-living and living. So if you are in this, and then human is just one of there, and you are not problematizing specifically the cognitive and the intention of the cognitive mind. Yeah. Well, I know I didn't answer you, but this is a really interesting point.
External
Yeah. Which one?
like that one, like the universe has a structure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Could be an
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's not too meta. It's more like physical.
Yeah, it can be. As Philip Ball in his book, I think he made this, that point. He concluded that biology is not so physic, but it is a bit. So he was trying to problematize this division. Sure.
Nice.
This is another problem we have, this where to put the separation. Thank you for your question.